ribs where no surgeon could reach. I can't do this anymore. I need a child. You know I do. And you've made it clear you can't give me one. She didn't cry anymore. Not since the first time she read it. Tears had been too heavy, too final. She traced the edge of the envelope with her thumb. The one she'd kept hidden beneath the floorboard of her nightstand, tucked beside an ultrasound photo she'd never shown him. Twins. 2 tiny hearts, beating like secrets. 2 lives she'd carried in silence for 7 months while he packed his bags in the master bedroom, while he told his friends she was broken, while he flew to Dubai to meet with fertility specialists who told him, in polite, clinical tones, that her chances were statistically negligible. He never asked why she didn't go with him. He never asked why she stopped laughing at dinner. He never asked why she started wearing long sleeves in July. The clock ticked. 3:17 a.m. Car pulled up outside. Eleanor didn't move. She knew that car. Black, polished, silent as a shadow. The one he drove when he came home from meetings he said were critical. The one he drove when he didn't want to be seen. The door opened. Footsteps on wet stone. Then knocking. Not the polite tap of a guest. Not the impatient thud of a man who'd lost patience. This was the knock of a man who had just realized he'd lost everything. She didn't answer. He knocked again. Louder. Then softer. Like he was afraid. Eleanor. His voice cracked through the wood. I'm sorry. She closed her eyes. It was the first time he'd said those words. Not I was wrong. Not I was confused. Not I was angry. I'm sorry. The rain slowed. The wind held its breath. He didn't leave. He stood there. For minutes, for lifetimes. Until his voice broke again, raw and trembling. I found the records. From the clinic in Zurich. The ones you never showed me. The ones they said you destroyed. A pause. A ragged inhale. They weren't destroyed, were they? You kept them. You kept everything. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her fingers trembled. The mug slipped slightly. A drop of tea fell onto the floor. Dark, like blood, like grief. I thought you didn't want them, he whispered. I thought you gave up. I thought you let go. I thought I was the only one who still loved you enough to fight. A sob escaped her. Quiet, hidden, but it was there. He heard it. He stepped back, then forward. Then, slowly, he pressed his forehead against the door. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know you were carrying them. She finally spoke. Her voice was a thread barely there. I didn't want you to feel guilty. He went still. I didn't want you to stay because you thought you owed me. Silence. Then, I didn't leave because you couldn't have children, he said, voice breaking like ice on a winter lake. I left because I was afraid. Afraid that if I stayed, I'd realize I loved you more than I loved the idea of being a father. And I was too proud to admit it. She turned then, slowly. The light from the hallway caught her face. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks pale. But her hands were resting on the swell beneath her sweater. 2 hands, one on each side, like she was holding something sacred. I didn't tell you, she said, her voice softer now, almost gentle. Because I knew if you found out, you'd come back, and I didn't want you to come back out of duty. He pressed his palm flat against the door. I'm not coming back out of duty, he swallowed. I'm coming back because I saw them. Her breath caught. The ultrasound, he whispered. The one they sent me from Zurich. The one you thought I'd never find. I saw them, Eleanor. 2 heartbeats. 2 lives. And I saw you. Standing there in the photo, holding your belly like it was the only thing left in the world worth saving. He paused. I didn't leave you because you couldn't give me a child. His voice shattered. I left you because I was too scared to be loved by someone who didn't need me to be perfect. The door clicked. It wasn't locked. It hadn't been for weeks. He didn't open it. He just stood there. And then, from the other side of the wood, he whispered, Please, let me hold them. Outside, the rain began again. Soft, gentle, like a prayer finally answered. Certo, Agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Me conte sobre o tópico tu com dialogo como su faço espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita moco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters when 3, max the door didn't open, but the silence did. It cracked, slowly, like a porcelain vase tipped too far, trembling on the edge of shattering. Eleanor didn't move. She didn't dare. Her fingers still rested on the curve of her belly, warm and alive beneath the thin cotton of her sweater. 2 hearts, 2 quiet miracles, beating in rhythm with the rain now drumming against the roof, as if heaven itself was holding its breath. She could hear him, not just his voice but the weight of him, the way his breath hitched after each word, the way his shoulders slumped as if the floor beneath him had become a cliff, and he was teetering on the edge of everything he'd buried. I didn't know, he whispered again. I swear to God, Eleanor. I didn't know. She closed her eyes. She remembered the day she found out, the sterile smell of the clinic, the nurse's too bright smile. You're carrying twins, Mrs. Whitmore. 2 little miracles. And then the silence that followed, not the kind of silence that means joy, but the kind that means what now? What do you do when the thing you've prayed for years comes wrapped in the fear that the man you love will never see you as whole? She told him once, just once. It was the night after the second test. They'd been lying side by side, not touching, the space between them colder than the hospital room. She turned to him, heart pounding like a trapped bird. Daniel, she'd said, voice small, trembling. I'm pregnant. He hadn't turned, just stared at the ceiling. Are you sure? She'd nodded. He'd sighed, a long, weary sound, like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. Then we'll do the IVF again, he'd said. Maybe next time, it'll stick. She'd swallowed the lump in her throat. Daniel, I'm already pregnant. He'd rolled over then, turned his back. I don't want to talk about it tonight. She never told him again. And now, he stood on the other side of a door she'd kept unlocked for months, waiting for him to come back. Not because she wanted him, but because she couldn't bear to be the one who closed the door on love. He spoke again, voice raw. I found your journal. She froze. He didn't say it like he'd stolen it. He said it like he'd been given a sacred text. I found it in the drawer of your desk, the one with the lock. You never let me touch it. I thought it was letters from your mother, or poems. I didn't know. His voice cracked. I didn't know it was your heart. He took a step back. Then another. I read it. All of it. A single tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek. Then another. He continued, voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. You wrote, I don't want him to feel sorry for me. I want him to love me because I'm me. Not because I'm fertile. Not because I'm a vessel. Just because I'm here. He paused. The silence between them stretched, heavy with every unspoken word. I didn't see you, he whispered. Not really. I saw the absence. I saw the empty space where a child should be, and I filled it with my own shame. I thought, if I left, maybe you'd be free. Maybe you'd find someone who could give you what I couldn't. He laughed, soft, broken, hollow. But you didn't want someone else, did you? She didn't answer. He stepped closer again. This time, his voice was quieter, softer, like he was afraid if he spoke too loud, she'd vanish. I thought I was saving you, he said, by leaving. But you were saving me. He pressed his palm flat against the door again. I read the entry from the day you went to the clinic, the day you found out about the twins. Eleanor closed her eyes. She remembered that day. The ultrasound technician had smiled. You're going to have 2 little boys. She'd whispered, Are you sure? The woman had nodded. Positive. 2 separate sacs. 2 separate hearts. Both strong. And then Eleanor had sat there, trembling, holding the black and white photo in her hands. 2 boys. And she'd thought, He'll never love them. Not the way he wants to love a child. Not the way he loves the idea of legacy. Not the way he loves money, power, control. She'd walked out of the clinic and into the rain. And she'd cried until her ribs ached. She hadn't told him. She'd spent the next 7 months stitching clothes for them, buying tiny socks, reading stories aloud to her belly when the nights were too long, whispering prayers into the dark. And every night, she'd whispered, "Please, God, let him come back before they're born. Let him see them. Let him see me." And now he was here, not with a contract, not with a lawyer, not with a check to make it right, just with a broken voice and a heart he didn't know how to mend. "I didn't leave because you couldn't give me a child," he said again, voice thick with tears. "I left because I was afraid you'd look at me one day and realize I wasn't enough." He swallowed hard. "I thought I needed a son to prove I was a man." He paused. "But I don't need a son." His voice dropped to a whisper so soft, she almost missed it. "I need you." Outside, the rain slowed to a hush. The wind stilled, and then a sound. Small, delicate, a flutter. Eleanor gasped. Daniel froze. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her hand pressed gently, lovingly, against her belly. And then again. Kick. Strong. Alive. Sure. And then another. 2. 1 on each side. Daniel's breath stopped. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there. And then, slowly, impossibly, he pressed his own hand against the door, right where her hand pressed from the other side. 2 palms, separated by wood, but feeling the same heartbeat, the same miracle, the same love, silent, secret, sacred. And for the first time in 2 years, Eleanor whispered, "They're here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because from the other side of the door, a sob broke free. Not of grief, not of guilt, of awe, of wonder, of a man who had spent his life chasing legacy, and forcing the shift in the room, the weight of something holy hanging in the air between them. Daniel stood in the threshold, his shadow stretching long across the wooden floor. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the mat beneath him. He didn't wipe his shoes. He didn't speak. He just watched her. The way her fingers trembled against her stomach, the way her shoulders hunched like she was trying to shield something precious from the world, from him. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said, voice low, frayed at the edges. "Not your peace, not your space, not even them." Eleanor finally lifted her eyes. They met his through the dim light, gray, storm-washed, filled with a kind of grief so deep it looked like surrender. She saw the lines on his face that hadn't been there 2 years ago, saw the hollows beneath his eyes, saw the man who once commanded boardrooms now standing in her hallway like a beggar at a temple door. "Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He swallowed. "Because I saw your face in that ultrasound photo, and I realized I'd never looked at you like that." "Like what?" "Like you were everything." A tear slipped free. She didn't wipe it away. He took 1 step inside. Just 1. Enough for the door to close behind him with a soft click. "I spent 2 years building towers," he said, his voice cracking. "And you were building life, and I wasn't even there to see it." She turned away, hugging her arms around herself. "You didn't want to see it." "I couldn't," he admitted. "Every time I thought of you, I saw the empty nursery, the quiet house, the future I believed we'd lost. I didn't know you were carrying it all inside you. Right there, while I was drowning in my own pride." She walked to the window, back to him now, staring out at the wet city. "I prayed for a sign," she said, voice trembling. "For months. Just one sign that you still loved me. Not the idea of me. The woman who cried in the shower so you wouldn't hear. The woman who stopped wearing perfume because you said it gave you headaches. The woman who memorized your coffee order so you'd never have to ask." He stepped closer, slowly, carefully. "I know your order too," he said softly. "Chamomile tea, 2 sugars, always stirred clockwise. You told me once it calmed your nerves." She froze. "You remembered?" "I remember everything," he said. I just didn't know how to love you through the silence. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Faint, fading, like a warning from another life. Then, a sharp gasp from Eleanor. She doubled over slightly, hand flying to her side. Eleanor. Daniel was at her side in an instant, but didn't touch her. Are you? It's nothing, she breathed, but her face was tight with discomfort. Just, Braxton Hicks. False labor. Happens all the time. But her voice shook. He studied her. How far along are you? 35 weeks. His breath caught. That's early. It's not dangerous, she said, though her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the windowsill. The doctor says everything's fine. But the way she said it, too quick, too bright, told him otherwise. He didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he slid down onto the floor beside her, his back against the wall, his legs stretched out toward the center of the room. I used to sit like this, he murmured, outside your office door when you were in meetings, just to hear your voice through the wall. She looked at him, surprised. You never told me. I didn't want you to think I was weak. She let out a soft, broken laugh. You think love is weakness? He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I used to. Silence settled between them again. But softer now, warmer. Then a movement. Not hers, not his. A ripple beneath her sweater. She placed her hand there, eyes widening. He's awake, she whispered. Daniel's gaze dropped to her belly. Can I? She hesitated, then nodded. He reached out, slowly, as if approaching a wild bird. His hand hovered for a moment, then gently rested on her stomach, just above the curve where life surged beneath skin. And then it happened. Kick, strong, deliberate, right against his palm. He flinched, not from pain but from awe. Oh my God, he breathed. Another kick, this time from the other side. He laughed. A real, shuddering laugh, thick with tears. They're saying hello. Eleanor's eyes filled. They've been practicing. He looked up at her, his eyes glassy. Do they have names? She shook her head. I couldn't. It felt like stealing something from you. He closed his eyes. I don't deserve that kind of grace. You don't, she said softly. But grace isn't about deserving. Outside, the rain returned, gentle now, like a lullaby. He didn't move his hand. And then, in the quiet, she asked the question that had lived in her bones for 2 years. Will you stay? He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned his head back against the wall, eyes closed, and let his breath mingle with hers in the stillness. And then a new sound, faint at first, then clearer. A low, rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump, from her belly. Fetal heartbeats. So strong the Doppler echo from her last checkup still lingered in the room like a sacred echo. Daniel opened his eyes. And in that moment he made a choice. Not with a promise. Not with a vow. But with a whisper. She didn't need to. He felt it. The way her breath hitched when the next kick came. Soft, insistent. Like tiny fists tapping against the walls of her soul. You feel that? She whispered. He nodded, eyes closed. His name is James, she said. I named him after your grandfather. The one who gave you that pocket watch. The one who said, love isn't loud. It's steady. Daniel's throat tightened. I never told you that story. I read it in your journal, she said. The one you found. The entry from your 16th birthday. You wrote, I want to be like him, not because he's rich, but because he loved my mother even when she was sick, even when she couldn't. Smile. He swallowed hard. You remembered that? I remember everything you ever said, she said, voice trembling. Even the things you didn't mean to say. A long silence. Then, I didn't know you kept it. I kept you, she whispered. He turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting hers for the first time since he'd stepped inside. You didn't just keep me, he said. You kept them. She looked down at her belly, her fingers tracing the curve where life pulsed beneath her palm. I didn't know if you'd ever come back, she admitted. So I made a promise to them. Every night I told them stories. About the man who used to read to me before bed. The man who held my hand when I was scared. The man who loved me before he knew what love really meant. Daniel's eyes filled. I didn't know I was that man. You were, she said. You just didn't believe it. Outside, the rain had turned to mist. The city lights blurred into halos. Somewhere, a church bell rang, soft, distant, like a call from another world. And then a sharp, sudden contraction. Eleanor gasped. Her hand flew to her stomach. Her breath came fast. Daniel was on his feet instantly. Eleanor, it's not time, she said, biting her lip. It's just a cramp. It happens. But her face had gone pale. He didn't argue. He didn't ask. He simply knelt beside her again, his hand finding hers, lacing their fingers together. Not as husband and wife, not as man and woman, as two souls standing at the edge of something sacred. I'm here, he whispered. She squeezed his hand. I know. Another contraction. Stronger. Her breath came in short bursts. Daniel, tell me. I think they're coming. His pulse spiked. Now? Not yet, she said, forcing a smile through the pain. But soon. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't look away. He just held her hand. And then something changed. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was reverence, like the moment before dawn, when the world holds its breath before the sun rises. He leaned forward, his forehead gently resting against hers. I'm so sorry, he whispered. For what? For not seeing you, for not listening, for thinking love meant having a child, instead of loving the woman who carried it. She closed her eyes. I'm not angry anymore, she said. He looked up, startled. I thought I would be, she continued. I thought I'd hate you for leaving. I thought I'd want you to suffer. But when I felt them move for the first time, I realized something. What? I didn't want you to suffer. She opened her eyes. Tears spilled over. I wanted you to feel them. He didn't speak. He just pressed his lips to her temple. And then a new sound, not from outside, from inside. A low, rhythmic thrumming, like a heartbeat amplified, multiplied. 2. Not 1. 2. Daniel's eyes widened. Are they? They're kicking again, she whispered, voice trembling with awe. Both of them. He lifted his hand slowly, reverently, and placed it back on her belly. And then a strong, unmistakable thump, right beneath his palm. Then another, from the opposite side. A dance. A conversation. Two tiny lives speaking in the language only a mother, and now a father could understand. Daniel's breath caught. Oh, he breathed. Oh, God. He didn't cry. Not yet. But his whole body shook. I never knew, he whispered. I never knew love could feel like this. She turned her head, her cheek resting against his. It's not about being a father, she said softly. What is it about, then? She looked down at her belly. It's about being chosen. He didn't understand. Not yet, but he would. Because in that moment, the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of two hearts beating. Full of a love that had waited. Full of a future that had been buried beneath pride. And now was rising. Like a sunrise. Quiet. Unstoppable. Sacred. And then a knock. 3 soft raps. Not from the door. From inside. A knock from the womb. Daniel froze. Eleanor smiled. They're saying hello again, she whispered. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just pressed his hand harder against her belly. And whispered, for the first time in his life, hello, James. Kick. Hello, Samuel. Another. He looked up at her, eyes glistening. Samuel? She nodded. I named him after my father, she said. The one who never left. Daniel's breath hitched. You named one after me. I named one after us, she said. He didn't answer. He just leaned his forehead against hers again. And in the quiet, between 2 heartbeats and the hush of falling rain, he finally understood. This wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about redemption. This was about belonging. And for the first time in his life, he belonged. To her, to them, to something greater than legacy, greater than wealth, greater than pride, something quiet, something holy, something that had been waiting for him all along. And now the door was open, the light was coming, and the twins, they were ready to meet their father. Just as soon as he was ready to meet them, a sharp, rhythmic pulse, two distinct thuds, one after the other, like tiny drums beating against the walls of her body. Eleanor's breath caught. Her fingers dug into Daniel's hand. "They're not just kicking," she whispered. Daniel didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes were locked on the swell beneath her sweater, as if he could see through skin and muscle and bone, straight into the dark, warm sanctuary where two lives had been hidden, loved, and held in silence for months. "They're talking," he breathed. She turned her head slowly, her eyes wide with something deeper than fear. "Not talking," she said. "Calling." A new sensation rolled through her, deeper this time. Not a flutter, not a kick, pressure. A slow, rolling wave that began low in her pelvis and rose like tide against her ribs. Her back arched slightly. A quiet moan slipped out. Daniel's face went pale. "Eleanor, it's not false labor," she said, voice tight. "It's real." He didn't hesitate. He was on his feet in an instant, moving with a precision she'd never seen in him before. Not the calculated stride of a man who controlled markets, but the frantic, tender urgency of a man who had just realized his entire world was about to be born. He grabbed his phone, fingers shaking as he dialed. 911, he said, voice cracking. "My wife, she's in labor. 35 weeks. Twins. We're at 17 Willow Lane. No, I don't need an ambulance. I need someone now." He hung up, then turned to her. "I'm taking you to the hospital." She gripped his wrist. "No," he froze. "Eleanor, I'm not going," she said, eyes blazing with a quiet, unshakable strength. "Not yet." He stared at her. "What do you mean, not yet?" She looked down at her belly, her voice softening, trembling with love. "They're not ready to leave yet." He didn't understand. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek, cold from the rain, now warm from her touch. "I've waited 2 years for you to come back," she whispered. "I'm not letting them be born without you holding my hand." He swallowed hard. "I'm here. I know." She paused. "But I need you to stay." He sank to his knees beside her again, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling. "I'm not leaving," he said, voice raw. "Not now. Not ever." She closed her eyes. And then another contraction, deeper, longer. Her body tensed. A cry escaped her, not of pain but of surrender. "Oh, Daniel." He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his chest pressed against her back, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you." She leaned into him, trembling. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice breaking. "I know. I don't want them to be born alone." He kissed her temple. "They won't be." Silence. Then a new sound. A soft, wet pop. Eleanor gasped. Daniel stiffened. "What was that?" She looked at him, eyes wide with wonder. "My water broke." He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. His hands, still wrapped around her, trembled. "You're really having them," he whispered. She nodded, tears streaming now. "Right here." He looked around the room, the faded rug, the half-finished quilt on the armchair, the photo of her holding a ultrasound on the fridge, the tiny onesie hanging on the doorknob, the name Samuel stitched in gold thread. He hadn't noticed any of it before. Now he saw it all. Every stitch of love, every silent prayer, every night she'd lain awake, talking to them. Every morning she'd whispered, "I'm still here." And now they were coming. And he was the only one who knew, the only one who had been chosen to witness it. The doorbell rang, loud, insistent. Daniel didn't move. Eleanor didn't move. Neither of them looked. because they both knew it wasn't the paramedics. It was the past, knocking, waiting, to be let in. He whispered, "Do you want me to answer it?" She didn't answer right away. She just pressed her hand over her belly, feeling the quiet, rolling rhythm beneath her skin. 2 hearts, 1 love, 1 chance. Then, "Not yet." Daniel turned his head. "Why?" She smiled, soft, broken, beautiful. "Because I want them to meet their father before anyone else meets them." He didn't understand. Not fully, but he felt it. The weight of what she was saying. That this wasn't just about birth. It was about belonging. And she was giving him the gift of being the first to hold them. Not the doctor, not the nurse, not the family. Him. The man who had walked away. The man who had broken her heart. The man who had finally come back. The doorbell rang again. Louder. More urgent. Eleanor closed her eyes. "Let them wait," she whispered. Daniel held her tighter and whispered back, "I will." Outside, the rain fell harder now. The street lamp flickered. A car passed, tires hissing on wet pavement. But inside, there was only this. The slow, steady rhythm of 2 unborn children. The trembling breath of a woman who had loved in silence. And the man who had spent his life building empires. Now kneeling on the floor of her kitchen, holding her hand, waiting for the moment when the world would change. And he would finally be worthy of it. The next contraction came. Stronger, longer. Eleanor cried out. Soft, broken, beautiful. Daniel pressed his lips to her forehead. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm here. I'm here." And as the room filled with the quiet symphony of labor, of breath, of tears, of love finally spoken, he made a silent vow. Not to God, not to the world, to her, to them. "I will never leave again. Not for money, not for pride, not for fear. I will be here, for every cry, for every first step, for every bedtime story, for every scraped knee, for every heartbeat. I will be here." And as the final wave rolled through her, she looked up at him, eyes shimmering with tears and triumph, and whispered, "They're coming, Daniel." He didn't answer. He just pressed his palm to her belly and waited, with her, for them, for the miracle, the one she had carried in silence, the one he had spent 2 years running from, the one that was about to change everything. The doorbell rang once more, but this time sacred chaos of life insisting on being born. Daniel didn't speak. He didn't try to calm her. He didn't tell her she was strong. He simply leaned his forehead against hers, their noses brushing, their breaths tangled like vines. "I'm here," he whispered again, and again, and again. "I'm here. I'm here." She gasped between waves, her eyes wide, unfocused, filled with something ancient and holy. You didn't have to come back," she choked out. "I didn't come back because I had to," he murmured, voice thick. "I came back because I couldn't stay away." Another wave rolled over her, deeper, longer. A cry tore from her throat, raw and unfiltered. Not a scream, not a plea, a song, a mother's song. And Daniel, this man who had built skyscrapers and silenced dissent with a single phone call, began to weep, quietly, unashamedly. Tears fell onto her cheek, mingling with hers. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry I didn't see you. I didn't see them. I saw a problem, a failure, a missing piece. I never saw you, the woman who loved me even when I was cruel. The woman who carried them in silence because she didn't want me to feel guilty." She reached up, her trembling hand cupping his face. "You didn't fail me," she whispered. "You were just afraid." He shook his head, his breath hitching. "I wasn't afraid of losing you," he said. "I was afraid of loving you enough to need you." She smiled through the pain. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." Another contraction. This one came faster, stronger. Her body clenched, muscles locking, her spine rigid. "Daniel," she gasped. "I can't." "You can," he said, voice breaking. "You're doing it. You're doing it." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, she saw him. Not the billionaire. Not the husband who left. Not the man who walked away. Just Daniel. The boy who used to read her poetry when she was sick. The man who still remembered how she took her tea. The father who had no idea how to hold a baby, but who was learning right now in the most sacred way possible. I feel them, she whispered. He froze. What? They're moving, she said, eyes wide with wonder. They're turning. He didn't understand. Then a shift. A soft, wet pressure. Not just a contraction. Presence. A descent. A beginning. Eleanor's breath stopped. Daniel's eyes widened. Eleanor, I think one's coming. His voice cracked. Now? She nodded, tears streaming. I can feel it. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't dare. He just held her tighter. And then a sound. Not from the door, not from the street, from inside. A soft, muffled pop, like a balloon letting go. And then a cry. Tiny, fragile, wet. It didn't fill the room. It broke it. Daniel didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stared at her belly, as if he could see through skin, through muscle, through the miracle of it all. Was that one of them? She whispered, voice trembling with awe. James. He didn't cry. He didn't laugh. He just pressed his palm against her stomach, where the second heartbeat still pulsed, strong, steady, alive. And then another cry, even softer, even more fragile. Samuel. Daniel's knees buckled. He slid to the floor, his forehead resting against her thigh, his shoulders shaking. Oh God, he breathed. Oh God, oh God. Eleanor reached down, her fingers brushing his hair. They're here, she whispered. He looked up at her, eyes red, face streaked with tears. They're here, she nodded. And you're here. He didn't answer. He just kissed her thigh. And then the doorbell rang. Loud, insistent. 3 sharp knocks. This time it wasn't the past. It was the world. The paramedics. The nurses. The reporters who'd been waiting outside since the hospital called for backup. But neither of them moved. Because in this room there were only 4 souls. 2 who had been broken. 2 who had been born. And 1 who had finally learned how to love. Eleanor looked down at her belly, where the second child still stirred. They're not done, she whispered. Daniel didn't ask what she meant. He just pulled her into his arms and whispered, I'm not leaving. She closed her eyes, and in the quiet, between the ragged breaths and the soft, wet cries of 2 newborns, she finally believed him. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street lamp flickered once, then held steady. The doorbell rang again, louder, more urgent. A voice called out, muffled through the wood. Ma'am? We're here to help. Eleanor didn't answer. She just looked at Daniel and smiled. They're ours, she whispered. He kissed her forehead. I know. And then he stood, slowly, gently. He lifted her into his arms, cradling her like she was the most precious thing in the world. And he carried her, barefoot, trembling, radiant, to the bedroom, to the crib, to the tiny onesies, to the quilt she'd stitched by lamplight, thread by thread, night after night. He laid her down, and then he knelt and reached for the first bundle, the one with the tiny fist curled against his chest, the one with the name James stitched in gold. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to hold a baby, but he knew how to love. So he kissed the crown of its head and whispered, Welcome, James. And then he reached for the second, the one who had waited longer, the one whose heartbeat had been the last to speak. He lifted Samuel gently, and for the first time in his life, he wept without shame. Welcome, Samuel, he breathed, and then he looked up at Eleanor, the woman who had carried both of them, in silence, in faith, in love. And he whispered, I'm so sorry I took so long. She smiled. You're here now. He nodded, and then he pulled her close, and the 3 of them, father, mother, sons, became one. No words, no titles, no past, just breath, just warmth, just love. And outside, the doorbell rang again. But this time, sacred as dawn. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his back straight, his arms wrapped around the two tiny bundles nestled against his chest, one in each arm. James, small and still, eyes closed like he'd already decided the world wasn't worth opening them for. Samuel, just a little wider awake, his lashes fluttering like moth wings against the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Eleanor lay back, exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, her body trembling with the aftershocks of labor. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just watched him, watched the way his fingers trembled as he traced the curve of James's ear, watched the way his breath caught when Samuel's tiny hand curled around his thumb, watched the way the man who had once walked out of this house with a suitcase and a silent vow to never look back now sat here weeping silently, as if the weight of two newborn lives had cracked open his soul and let the light pour in. "You're holding them right," she whispered. He didn't look up. "I don't know if I am." "You are." He swallowed hard. "I've never held anything this small." "You've held me," she said, "when I was scared, when I was sick, when I thought I was broken." He finally looked at her. His eyes were raw. "I didn't know how to hold you," he said. "I thought love meant fixing things, giving you things, a house, a car, a baby, but I didn't know love meant staying." She reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist. "You stayed." He nodded, voice thick. "I'm staying." Outside, the doorbell rang again. 3 times. Firm, insistent. A woman's voice, calm, professional, called through the wood. "Mr. Whitmore? We're here with the midwife and the neonatal team. We can help you with the babies. We just need to check on Eleanor." Daniel didn't move. He didn't answer. He just looked down at Samuel and whispered, "Do you remember the night you told me you were pregnant?" Eleanor blinked. "I didn't tell you," she said. "You didn't have to," he replied. "I found the receipt. From the clinic. The one you paid for with cash. The one you never told me about." She didn't answer. He continued, voice barely above a breath. "You bought the ultrasound. You scheduled the appointment. You came alone. And you didn't tell me because you knew I'd say no." She closed her eyes. "I didn't want you to say yes out of duty." He shook his head. "I didn't say yes because I thought it was my duty." He looked up at her. "I said yes because I saw your face in that photo." She opened her eyes. "What photo?" "The one you kept," he said. "The one tucked under your pillow. The one with the ultrasound. You had it framed. You wrote on the bottom, 'For the man who still doesn't know he's a father.'" Eleanor's breath stopped. "I didn't know you knew about that." "I didn't," he said. "Not until I found it. Last night. After I left the hospital. After I read your journal. After I realized you didn't just carry them." He paused. "You carried me." She didn't speak. She didn't have to, because he was crying again, quietly, like a man who had spent years building walls and just realized he'd been living inside them. "I thought I needed a legacy," he whispered. "I thought I needed a son to prove I was more than a man who lost his mother too young. That I was more than the boy who cried in the bathroom when the nurses said she wouldn't wake up." He looked down at James. "I thought if I had a child, I could fix the past." He looked at Samuel. "But you didn't give me a child to fix what was broken." He met her gaze. "You gave me a reason to be whole." Eleanor's eyes filled. "I didn't give you anything," she said. "I just loved you." He shook his head. "No," he whispered. "You loved me through the silence." A long pause. Then Samuel stirred. His tiny fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered. And then he opened his eyes. Not wide, not startled, just curious, like he was looking at the world for the first time and seeing his father. Daniel froze. He didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. Samuel stared at him, and then he smiled. Not a cry, not a frown. A real, quiet, perfect smile. Daniel's breath left him. "Oh," he whispered. Eleanor's heart stopped. "Did you see that?" she breathed. Daniel didn't answer. He just leaned forward, so slowly, so gently, that his forehead touched Samuel's. and whispered, "Hello, little one." Samuel blinked, and then he reached up, with a hand no bigger than a thumb, and touched Daniel's cheek. Just once, a feather light brush, and then he closed his eyes, and slept. Daniel didn't move. He didn't dare. He just sat there holding his son, as if the world had paused, as if time had bowed, as if the universe had whispered, "This is where you were meant to be." Outside, the doorbell rang again, louder, more urgent. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to come in." Daniel didn't move. He didn't answer. He just looked at Eleanor, and whispered, "They're ours." She nodded. "They always were." He looked back at the babies, at James, still sleeping, at Samuel, still smiling in his dreams, and then he leaned down and kissed James's forehead, then Samuel's, then Eleanor's, and finally he stood, still holding them, one in each arm, and walked to the door. He didn't open it. Not yet. He just pressed his palm against the wood, and spoke, quietly, firmly, for the first time as a father. "Not yet." Silence. Then a soft knock. Not from the door. From the hallway. From the other side of the wall. A child's voice. Small. Curious. "Daddy." Daniel froze. Eleanor sat up. "Who?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her. Eleanor's eyes widened. "No," he nodded. "Yes." She whispered. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't know," he said. "Until tonight. Until I saw them. Until I heard them cry. Until I realized, I'm not just a father to them." He looked toward the hallway. "I'm a father to him, too." The doorbell rang again. But this time it wasn't the paramedics. It wasn't the reporters. It was the past. Knocking. Waiting. To be let in. Daniel didn't move. He just held his sons. And whispered, "I'm not leaving again." And then he turned and walked toward the hallway, not to answer, not to explain, but to meet him, to hold him, to say, "You're not alone anymore." And as he stepped into the dark corridor, the house held its breath. The rain had stopped, the stars had come out, and somewhere a clock ticked. Once, twice, 3 times, and then the door to the nursery opened, softly, slowly, and for the first time in years the Whitmore home was full. Not with money, not with power, not with legacy, but with love. Quiet. Behind him, Eleanor sat up slowly on the bed, her body aching, her heart pounding. Not from pain, but from fear, because she knew. She'd seen the photo on his desk last week. The one he'd never shown her. A boy, 8 years old, with Daniel's eyes, and her own smile. She hadn't said anything. Not then. Not now. But now he was walking toward him. And the silence between them wasn't just quiet. It was sacred. It was terrifying. It was the edge of a cliff. And Daniel didn't turn back. He didn't look at her. He didn't speak. He just walked. One step, then another, until he reached the door at the end of the hall. The one with the faded blue doorknob. The one with the sticker still clinging to it. Samuel's room. No monsters allowed. His breath caught. He didn't knock. He didn't need to, because from inside a small voice, soft, trembling, "Daddy." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. He didn't answer. He couldn't. So he turned the knob. Slowly, gently, as if the door were made of glass. And inside, the room was dim. A nightlight glowed like a star above the bed. And there, curled beneath a quilt stitched with stars and moons, was a boy, 8 years old. Hair too long, eyes too wide, skin pale from months of quiet solitude. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. At Daniel, at the babies, at the man who had left. And then he whispered, "You came back." Daniel stepped inside. He didn't close the door. He didn't set the babies down. He just stood there, holding them both, his sons, his past, his future, all of them trembling in the same fragile space. "I didn't know you were here," Daniel said, voice raw. The boy didn't blink. "I didn't know you'd come." Silence. Then Daniel took a step forward. "Your name isn't Samuel." The boy shook his head. No, Daniel swallowed. What is it? The boy looked down at his hands. Elias. Daniel's breath stopped. Elias. The name landed like a prayer. Elias lifted his eyes. They told me you forgot me. Daniel's chest cracked. I didn't forget you. You didn't visit. I didn't know. Elias's voice broke. They said you didn't want me. Daniel stepped closer. Who told you that? Mom. Daniel froze. Your mother, she's gone. Elias nodded. She died last year. Daniel's throat tightened. I know. I didn't know how to tell you. Elias whispered. I didn't know if you'd even care. Daniel didn't move. He just looked at him. At the boy who had lived in this house for 8 years. Who had slept in the room Daniel had never stepped into. Who had waited. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every night. For a father who never came. And then, Daniel did something he'd never done in his life. He dropped to his knees. Right there. On the floor. Still holding his newborn sons. And he whispered, I'm sorry. Elias didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't smile. Just stared. As if he'd been waiting for those words his whole life. And now they were here. And they were real. Daniel reached out. Not to touch him. Not yet. Just to hold out his hand. Empty. Open. Come here, he said. Elias didn't move. Then slowly. So slowly it felt like time itself was bending. He slid off the bed. His bare feet touched the cold floor. He took one step. Then another. Until he stood right in front of Daniel. And then he looked down. At the babies. At James. At Samuel. And whispered, They're beautiful. Daniel's breath hitched. They're yours. Elias blinked. What? They're your brothers. Elias's eyes widened. My brothers. Daniel nodded. You're not alone anymore. Elias looked up at him. Why didn't you come? Daniel's voice broke. Because I was afraid. Of what? Of loving you enough to need you. Elias didn't speak. He just reached out and touched Daniel's cheek, just like Samuel had, a feather-light brush. And then he whispered, I missed you. Daniel's tears fell, hot, heavy, unstoppable. He pulled Elias into his arms, holding him, holding all 3 boys, James still sleeping, Samuel stirring, his tiny fingers curling around Daniel's shirt. Elias pressed his face into Daniel's shoulder, and for the first time in 8 years he cried, not quiet, not careful, not afraid, just free. And outside, the doorbell rang again, louder, more insistent. Woman's voice, firm now. Mr. Whitmore, please open the door. We have the hospital's neonatal team here. We need to check on the twins and the mother. Daniel didn't move. He didn't answer. He just held Elias tighter and whispered, They're not alone anymore. Elias lifted his head. What does that mean? Daniel looked down at him. It means, you're not the only one who was waiting. He looked at the babies, then at Elias, then at the doorway where Eleanor stood, silent, trembling, her hair loose, her eyes wet. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. She'd just watched. From the doorway, watching him kneel, watching him hold them, watching him become a father, not just to the ones he'd created, but to the one he'd abandoned. And now she stepped forward, slowly, gently, until she stood beside him, and reached out, not to Elias, to Daniel, and took his hand. Then she reached down, and took Elias's, and whispered, Welcome home, sweetheart. Elias looked up at her, and then he saw her, really saw her, the woman who had lived in this house, who had raised him, who had tucked him in every night, who had whispered prayers over him when he cried, who had never told him his father didn't love him. She had only ever said, He's coming. And now he was, and so was she, and so were the babies, and so was love. Not perfect, not easy, not loud, but real. And for the first time, Elias didn't feel alone. He felt seen. He leaned into Eleanor's hand and whispered, Are you my mom? She smiled through tears. I've always been. Daniel looked at them, at his wife, at his son, at his newborns, and then he closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For holding on, for not giving up, for loving him even when he didn't deserve it, for letting him come back, and for showing him that love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits, in silence, in darkness, in a quiet room with a blue doorknob, and then it opens, when you're finally ready to walk in. Outside, the doorbell rang one last time. Then silence. The paramedics didn't knock again. They didn't need to, because from inside they heard it. The sound of a family. Not perfect, not rich, not famous, but whole. And for the first time, Daniel Whitmore didn't have to be a billionaire. He just had to be a father. And he was, right here. Elias didn't let go of Daniel's hand. He hadn't since he stepped out of his room. And Daniel hadn't let go of him. Not even when Elias's small fingers trembled as he stared at the twins. James, still curled like a question mark. Samuel, now awake, his eyes blinking up at the ceiling like he was counting stars. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket she hadn't realized she'd pulled around herself. Her legs were bare, her hair tangled. Her body still ached from the storm that had passed through her. But her heart was whole. She watched them, Daniel, kneeling on the floor like a man who'd spent his life climbing ladders, only to realize the ground was where he belonged. Elias, small and silent, his gaze fixed on the babies as if they were the first true thing he'd ever seen. And the twins, two miracles wrapped in silence. One had been born in pain. One had been born in waiting. And now they were all here, together. Daniel finally spoke. "Do you remember the night I left?" Elias didn't answer right away. He just looked down at his shoes. "I remember you packing your suitcase," he whispered. "I was hiding in the closet. I didn't want you to go." Daniel's throat tightened. "I didn't say goodbye. I know. I didn't even look at you." Elias nodded. "I didn't want you to." Daniel looked up at him, eyes glistening. "Why?" "Because if you looked at me, you'd see I was crying." A single tear slipped down Elias's cheek. "And I didn't want you to feel guilty." Daniel's breath caught. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just reached out, slowly, gently, and brushed the tear away with his thumb. "You didn't have to hide," he whispered. "I didn't want to be a burden." Eleanor's voice was soft. "You were never a burden." Elias turned to her. "I wasn't your real son." She smiled, gentle, fierce, unshakable. "No," she said. "You were the son I chose." He blinked. "I didn't know." "You didn't have to," she said. "You just had to be you." Daniel looked between them, his wife, his son, his newborns. And then he stood, still holding Elias's hand, still holding Samuel in one arm. James nestled against his chest. He walked to the window. The night had cleared. Stars blinked through the trees. He opened the curtain and whispered, "I used to think love was something you earned." He turned to them. "I thought if I was rich enough, successful enough, strong enough, you'd all stay." He looked at Elias. "I thought if I gave you money, you'd stop missing me." He looked at Eleanor. "I thought if I gave you a baby, you'd stop loving me in silence." He looked at the twins. "I thought if I had a legacy, I'd finally be enough." He paused. His voice cracked. "But I was wrong." He turned back to the window. "The only thing that ever made me enough." He looked at them. Each one, eyes wet, hearts bare. "Was you loving me when I didn't love myself." Elias stepped forward. He didn't say anything. He just reached up and placed his hand on Daniel's chest, right over his heart, and whispered, "Can I stay here with you?" Daniel's breath left him. He didn't answer with words. He knelt again and pulled Elias into his arms, holding him, holding Samuel, holding James. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything. He felt like a man who had been given everything. Eleanor rose slowly. She walked to them, and without a word, she reached out and touched Elias's head, just once, like a blessing, like a promise. And then she turned to the door and opened it. The paramedics stood there, 2 nurses, a midwife, a doctor, all of them holding equipment, all of them ready to take over. But they didn't step in. They didn't speak. They just stared. At the scene before them, a man on his knees, 2 newborns in his arms, a boy 8 years old, curled against his chest, and a woman, pale, tired, radiant, standing beside them, her hand resting on the boy's shoulder. The midwife stepped forward. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "we're here to help." Daniel didn't look up. He just whispered, "We're already helped." The doctor hesitated. "May we check on the babies?" Daniel nodded. He didn't let go. He just shifted Samuel slightly. The nurse stepped forward. She didn't reach for the baby. She knelt and looked at Elias. "Do you want to hold him?" she asked gently. Elias didn't answer. He just looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded. "Go ahead." The nurse lifted Samuel carefully. Elias reached out and took him, not like a stranger, not like a guest, like a brother, like he'd been waiting his whole life to do this. Samuel stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at Elias and smiled, just a little, a quiet, perfect curve of lips. Elias gasped. "He smiled at me." The nurse smiled too. "He knows you." Elias looked up at Daniel. "Does he know I'm his brother?" Daniel didn't answer. He just pulled Elias closer and whispered, "He's always known." Outside, the first light of morning touched the horizon. Pale, soft, golden. The hospital team didn't leave. They didn't take the babies. They didn't rush Eleanor. They just stayed, quiet, watching, because they'd seen 1,000 births. But never one like this. Never one where a father didn't arrive with a checklist. He arrived with his heart, and a son who had been waiting, and a wife who had never stopped loving him, and 2 babies who had never asked for a name, or a fortune, or a perfect father. They had only asked to be held. And now they were. Daniel looked down at Elias. "You want to name them?" he asked. Elias nodded. "James," he whispered, "like Grandpa James." Daniel's breath caught. "You knew his name?" Elias nodded. "I found your journal, the one on your desk, the one you thought I didn't see." Daniel stared. "You read it." "I read the part where you wrote, 'I wish I could be the father my son deserves.'" Daniel's voice broke. "I didn't know you knew that." "I read it every night," Elias said, "before I went to sleep." Daniel pulled him tighter. "I'm sorry I wasn't here to read it with you." Elias looked up. "Are you here now?" Daniel nodded. "Always." Eleanor stepped forward. She reached into the drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to Daniel. He opened it. Inside, a single photo of Elias, age 3, smiling, holding a stuffed bear, with a note scribbled in her handwriting. "He asked for you every day. He didn't cry. He just waited. I didn't tell him you were coming. I told him you were on your way." Daniel's hands shook. He looked at Elias. "You knew?" Elias nodded. "I knew you'd come back." Daniel's voice cracked. "How?" Elias smiled, small, soft, real. "Because you promised." Daniel blinked. "I never promised." Elias looked at him. "You did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Daniel. Daniel unfolded it. It was a child's drawing. Stick figures. A house. A man. A woman. 2 babies. And underneath, in messy, wobbly letters, "Daddy, I'm still here." Daniel didn't speak. He didn't move. He just pressed the drawing to his chest and whispered, "I'm here too." And then he looked at the sky, at the sunrise, at the world waking up. And for the first time, he didn't want to control it. He didn't want to own it. He just wanted to live in it. With them. With all of them. And as the sun spilled through the window, catching the tears on Elias's cheeks, the tiny fingers of Samuel curling around his brother's thumb, the quiet strength in Eleanor's smile, and the soft, steady breaths of James, Daniel knew. This wasn't a story about a billionaire. It wasn't about twins. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about a man who had spent his life running and finally found his way home. Not by money, not by power, not by legacy, but by love. Quiet, unseen, unshakable, and finally, falling with the quiet rhythm of a child who had never known fear. The photo, "Daddy, I'm still here," was still clutched in Daniel's hand. Folded and unfolded so many times the paper was soft at the edges. Eleanor stood beside them, barefoot, wrapped in the blanket, her eyes never leaving Elias. No one spoke. No one needed to. The nurses had stepped back. The doctor had lowered her clipboard. The midwife had turned off the monitor, not because it was no longer needed, but because the silence had become its own kind of medicine. And then Elias moved, not suddenly, not dramatically, just shifted. He lifted his free hand, still holding Samuel, and reached out, not toward Daniel, not toward the babies, toward Eleanor. His fingers trembled. A breath passed between them, a lifetime. Then he touched her wrist, just once, a whisper of skin on skin. Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just looked down at his hand. And then she reached out and took his, not gently, not carefully, but firmly, like she was pulling him home, not with words, with presence, with belonging. "You're not a guest here," she said, voice quiet but unshakable. "You never were." Elias swallowed. I thought you hated me." Eleanor's eyes filled. "Why would you think that?" "Because you never said you loved me." Daniel stiffened. He hadn't known that. He hadn't known any of this. Eleanor didn't look at him. She looked only at Elias. "I didn't say it," she whispered, "because I didn't want you to think love was something you had to earn." Elias blinked. "What do you mean?" She smiled, soft, broken, true. "I loved you the moment I saw you in the hospital. You were 2 days old. Your eyes were so wide. You didn't cry. You just stared. Like you were trying to figure out why no one had come for you." She squeezed his hand. "I didn't say I love you, because I didn't want you to think it was a reward for being good, or quiet, or not asking for too much." Her voice cracked. "I said it every night, in my prayers, when I tucked you in, when I kissed your forehead, when I cried because I wished he could see you." She finally looked at Daniel. "He didn't know you existed." Daniel's throat tightened. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You weren't supposed to," she said. "I didn't want you to feel guilty. I didn't want you to come back out of duty. I wanted you to come back, because you missed us." Daniel looked down at Elias, at the boy who had lived in this house for 8 years, who had slept in the room with the blue doorknob, who had drawn pictures of a father who never came, who had waited, every day, every night, without complaint, without anger, just love, quiet, unseen, unshakable. And now he was here, and Daniel didn't know how to hold him, so he did the only thing he could. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to Elias's, just like he had with Samuel, just like he had with Eleanor, and whispered, "I'm so sorry I wasn't here." Elias didn't answer. He just leaned into him. And then he whispered, "I'm not mad." Daniel's breath caught. "Not even a little?" Elias shook his head. "I'm just glad you're here now." Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he didn't try to fix anything. He didn't try to explain. He didn't try to make it better. He just held him and let the silence do the healing. Outside, a bird sang. One note, clear, unafraid. And then Samuel stirred. He turned his head and looked at Elias, not with confusion, not with fear, with recognition, like he'd known him all along. And then he reached out with his tiny hand and touched Elias's cheek. Just once. A brush, a blessing, a whisper. "You're mine too," Elias gasped. He looked down at Samuel, and then he smiled. A real, trembling, radiant smile. The first one Daniel had ever seen on his face. "His name is Samuel," Elias whispered. Daniel nodded. "I know. And James," Elias added. Daniel looked at the sleeping boy on his shoulder. Yes. Elias looked up at him. Can I hold them both? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He shifted. Carefully. Slowly. He placed James into Elias's arms. The baby stirred. Just a little. Then settled, his head resting against Elias's chest. Then Daniel lifted Samuel and placed him gently against Elias's other side. 2 babies. 1 boy. All of them pressed together, like they'd been waiting for this moment, like they'd been stitched together by love long before they ever met. Elias looked down at them. His breath came fast. His eyes shimmered. They're warm, he whispered. Daniel nodded. They're alive. Elias looked up at him. Will you teach me how to hold them? Daniel's voice broke. Every day. Elias looked at Eleanor. Will you teach me how to love them? She smiled. I already have. Daniel looked at them, at his wife, at his son, at his sons, and then he reached out and took their hands. All 3, Elias's, Eleanor's, and the tiny fingers of Samuel, still curled around Elias's thumb, and he whispered, I'm not leaving again. Elias didn't say anything. He just rested his head against Daniel's shoulder and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 8 years he slept. Not afraid, not waiting, just safe. The morning light spread across the room. The nurses didn't move. The doctor didn't speak. They just watched, because they'd seen miracles before, but never one like this. Never one where a father didn't arrive with a checkbook. He arrived with a broken heart, and a boy who had never stopped believing in him, and a wife who had never stopped loving him, and 2 babies who didn't care about his name, his fortune, his fame. They only cared that he was here, that he was holding them, that he was home. And as the sun climbed higher, catching the tear on Elias's cheek, the quiet smile on Samuel's lips, the peace in James's sleep, and the strength in Eleanor's gaze, Daniel knew he wasn't a billionaire anymore. He wasn't a husband. He wasn't even a father. Not in the way the world defined it. He was something quieter, something deeper, something that couldn't be bought, couldn't be sold, couldn't be lost. He was a man who had been broken and loved back together. And as the first rays of morning touched the window, he whispered, Thank you, not to God, not to fate, not to luck, to them, to the ones who had waited, to the ones who had loved, to the ones who had never let go. And then he closed his eyes and held them, all of them, together. And for the first time, he didn't need to be anything else. He was enough, just as he was, just as they were. And the world could wait, gentle, like a mother tiptoeing into a child's room at dawn. It touched the edge of Elias's hair, still damp from sleep. It kissed the curve of James's cheek, where a single tear had dried in the night. It glided over Samuel's fingers, still curled around Elias's thumb, as if he'd been holding on since the moment he was born. No one moved. No one spoke. Not because they were tired, but because to move would be to break the spell. To speak would be to shatter the silence. And this silence, this quiet, trembling, holy silence, was the first true thing Daniel had ever known. Elias slept. His head rested against Daniel's shoulder. His arms, still wrapped around the twins, held them like they were the only anchors left in a world that had once swept him away. Daniel didn't dare shift. He didn't dare breathe too loud. He just sat there, knees bent on the floor, back against the bed, his body a throne of love built not of gold or power, but of presence. Eleanor sat beside them, her legs tucked beneath her, her hands folded in her lap. She watched them, not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a witness to a miracle. She remembered the nights she'd sat in the same room, rocking Elias to sleep, whispering to him in the dark, Your father loves you. He just doesn't know how to say it yet. She remembered the birthdays she'd celebrated alone. Cake with 2 candles, because Elias insisted on one for himself, and one for Daddy wherever he is. She remembered the Christmas Eve when Elias had left a stocking by the door, empty, except for a note. For Daddy, I saved my allowance. I hope you like socks. She'd kept the socks. Still in the drawer. Still folded. Still waiting. She hadn't told Daniel. She hadn't wanted to burden him. She hadn't wanted him to come back out of guilt. She'd wanted him to come back. Because he missed them. Because he loved them. Because he was finally ready. And now he was. The clock ticked. 7:14 a.m. outside. A car door slammed. Then footsteps. Quick. Purposeful. Not the hesitant knock of a stranger. Not the urgent pounding of the hospital team. This was different. This was familiar. Daniel didn't move. Eleanor didn't look up. But Elias stirred. His eyelids fluttered. He didn't wake. Not fully. But he murmured, "Daddy?" Daniel's breath caught. He didn't answer. He just pressed his cheek against Elias's hair. And whispered, "I'm here." The footsteps stopped. Right outside the door. A pause. Then a soft, hesitant knock. One tap. Then another. Eleanor finally looked up. Her eyes widened. She didn't speak. She just stood, slowly, and walked to the door. She didn't open it. Not yet. She just pressed her palm against the wood. And whispered, "Who's there?" A voice, thin, trembling, older, answered from the other side. Is he here?" Eleanor didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. And whispered, "Yes." The door opened. Slowly. A woman stood there. 70 maybe. Silver hair pulled into a loose bun. Eyes the color of storm clouds. Wrinkles carved deep by years of silence. She wore a faded cardigan. Held a paper bag. In her other hand a small, worn teddy bear. With one eye missing. And a patch of blue thread stitched over its chest. Eleanor's breath left her. Marianne. The woman didn't step inside. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked past Eleanor. Past Daniel. Past the babies. And fixed her gaze on Elias. Still asleep. Still held. Her voice cracked. He looks like you." Eleanor nodded. "He looks like you." Marianne's hands trembled. "I didn't know he was here." Eleanor stepped aside. "Come in." Marianne didn't move. "I didn't think he'd still be alive." Eleanor's eyes filled. "He's more than alive." Marianne's gaze dropped to the babies. To Elias holding them. To Daniel kneeling beside him. To the photo on the floor, the one Elias had drawn. "Daddy, I'm still here." Marianne's knees buckled. She didn't fall. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just true. Daniel didn't move. But Elias stirred. Again. His eyes fluttered open. And he looked up. At the woman. At the bear. At the face he'd seen in old photographs. At the grandmother he'd never met. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He just looked. And then he lifted his hand. Not toward Daniel. Not toward the babies. Toward her. And whispered, "Grandma." Marianne's breath stopped. She stepped forward. One slow step. Then another. Until she stood before them. She reached out. And took the teddy bear from her bag. She held it out. "I made this for you," she whispered. "The day they told me you were gone." Elias didn't take it. He just looked at it. At the blue thread. At the missing eye. At the worn fur. And then he looked at Daniel. And whispered, "Can I keep it?" Daniel nodded. "Of course." Elias reached out. And took the bear. Then he turned. And placed it gently on James's chest. As if he'd been waiting his whole life to do this. Marianne's tears fell. Quiet. Unstoppable. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered. Elias didn't answer. He just leaned his head against Daniel's shoulder. And whispered, "I didn't think I'd ever see you." Marianne stepped closer. And knelt. On the floor. Beside them. She didn't reach for Elias. She didn't try to hug him. She just looked at him. And whispered, "I loved you every day." Elias blinked. "I know." She swallowed. "How?" "Because you sent the letters." Marianne froze. "What letters?" Elias looked at Eleanor. She nodded. "Every month," Elias said. "A card. Always. The same. picture of a bird, and a note. He reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, crumpled, sticky with the residue of 1,000 hugs. He handed it to Marianne. She unfolded it. The same bird, the same handwriting. My dearest Elias, I'm still here, even when you can't see me, even when you think I've forgotten. I'm watching, I'm loving, I'm praying, I'm holding you in my heart. Grandma Marianne's hands shook. I never sent them. Eleanor spoke softly. You did. Marianne looked up. What? You sent them, Eleanor said. Every month. For 8 years. But I never gave them to him. Marianne's eyes widened. Why? Because I didn't want him to feel like he had to forgive you. Marianne stared. You kept them? I kept them, Eleanor said. Because I knew one day you'd come back. Marianne looked at Elias, and then she reached out and gently touched his cheek, just once, like she was afraid he'd vanish, and whispered, I didn't know you were still here. Elias looked at her and smiled, not big, not loud, just real. I'm still here. Marianne's tears fell harder. I didn't know how to say I was sorry. Elias didn't answer. He just reached out and took her hand and placed it on the bear, on James's chest, and whispered, He's here too. Marianne looked down at the baby, at the bear, at her grandson, and then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to Elias's and whispered, I'm here now. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a woman who had lost a child. She felt like a grandmother who had found one. Daniel didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched, as the woman who had once been broken by grief now held the boy who had been broken by silence, and the babies who had never known loss now knew, for the first time, that love doesn't always come with a voice. Sometimes it comes with a card, a bare, quiet hand, promise whispered across years. And then it comes home. The sun rose higher, the room filled with light, and the silence was no longer empty. It was full of forgiveness, full of belonging, full of grace. And as Marianne stayed there, kneeling, holding, crying, Elias closed his eyes and whispered, Will you read to me tonight? Marianne nodded. Every night. Will you stay? She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just reached into her bag and pulled out another card, and another, dozens, all with the same bird, all with the same words. She placed them gently on the floor, beside the bed, and whispered, I've been writing them for you, all along. Elias smiled, and then he fell asleep, again, not afraid, not waiting, just loved. And Daniel? He looked at his wife, at his son, at his mother-in-law, at his sons, and he whispered, Thank you, not to God, not to fate, to them, to the ones who never gave up, to the ones who loved in silence, to the ones who showed up when he finally learned how to be worthy of it. And outside, the world woke. Cars passed, birds sang, life moved on, but inside time stopped, because for the first time they were all here. Marianne still knelt, her hand resting on Elias's shoulder, the stack of cards beside her like a bridge built over years of silence. The teddy bear lay nestled against James's chest, its blue-threaded heart stitched right over where his tiny heartbeat pulsed. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. His arms were wrapped around Samuel, who had fallen asleep again, this time with his head resting on Elias's knee, as if he'd known, even in his first hours of life, that this boy was his anchor. Eleanor sat cross-legged beside them, her fingers tracing the edge of the last card Marianne had given her. I'm still here. She looked up, at Daniel, at Elias, at Marianne, and then, she whispered, He never knew. Daniel didn't ask who. He knew. He looked at Elias, at the boy who had carried the weight of a father's absence like a second skin. He never knew, Eleanor repeated. That you sent those cards. Marianne didn't look up. Her voice was quiet, like wind through old trees. I didn't want to intrude. You didn't intrude, Eleanor said. You loved. Marianne's fingers tightened around the bear. I thought, if I sent them, he'd think I was trying to replace you. Eleanor shook her head. You didn't replace me. Marianne finally looked at her. I didn't know how to be a grandmother. You were, Eleanor said softly. You just didn't know how to show it. A long silence. Then Elias stirred, not fully awake, just shifting. His hand, still curled around Samuel, twitched. And then he murmured, Grandma. Marianne froze. Her breath caught. Yes, sweetheart, she whispered. Elias didn't open his eyes, but his fingers tightened. Will you hold me? Marianne didn't hesitate. She reached out and pulled him into her arms. Not gently, not carefully, but fiercely, like she'd been holding him in her heart for 8 years. And now, finally, she could hold him in her arms. She buried her face in his hair and wept, not loud, not dramatic, just deep, like a river that had been dammed too long. Daniel didn't look away. He didn't try to fix it. He just watched and whispered, I didn't know you cared. Marianne lifted her head. Tears streaked her cheeks. I didn't know I could. Elias opened his eyes. Just a sliver. Just enough to see her. And then he whispered, I'm not mad. Marianne's breath hitched. I know. I just missed you. She pulled him closer. I missed you too. Outside, a breeze lifted the curtain. It fluttered like a wing. And then Samuel stirred. Again, his tiny fingers curled. And then he let out a soft, sleepy cry. Not loud, not demanding, just needing. Marianne didn't move. She didn't reach for him. She just looked at Daniel and whispered, Can I hold him? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He shifted, carefully, slowly. He lifted Samuel and placed him into Marianne's arms. She gasped, not from shock, from awe. His head was so small, his skin so soft, his breath so light. She held him like she was holding a prayer, like she was holding something too holy to touch. And then Samuel opened his eyes and looked at her, not with fear, not with confusion, with recognition, as if he'd known her all along, as if he'd been waiting. Marianne's tears fell onto his cheek, and he blinked, and then he smiled, just a little, a curve of lips, a quiet miracle, and then he reached up, with his tiny hand, and touched her nose, just once. Marianne's breath stopped. She looked at Daniel. He knows me. Daniel nodded. He's always known. Elias, still nestled against her side, whispered, Can you sing to him? Marianne hesitated. I don't know any songs. Elias smiled faintly. You know the one. She looked at him. The one about the bird? He nodded. She closed her eyes and began. Her voice was thin, old, but clear, like wind through a church window. Little bird, fly so high. Watch the sun, watch the sky. If you're lost, if you're afraid, I'll be here, I'll be here. She didn't know the rest. She didn't need to, because as she sang, Samuel's eyelids fluttered. And then he sighed and slept. Marianne didn't stop. She kept singing, even when her voice cracked, even when her tears fell, even when Daniel's breath caught, even when Eleanor turned away to hide her own tears. And Elias, he pressed his cheek against her side and whispered, Again. So she sang it again and again, until the room was filled with nothing but her voice, and the quiet breaths of 2 babies, and the silence of a family finally found. Outside, the world stirred. A neighbor walked their dog. Car honked. A child laughed in the distance. But inside, there was only this: a grandmother singing, a boy listening, a father holding his son, a wife watching, and 2 babies who didn't care who held them. They only cared that they were held. And then Marianne stopped. Her voice faded. She looked down at Samuel and whispered, I didn't know love could feel like this. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? She didn't answer right away. She just traced Samuel's tiny ear. I thought love was something you gave. She looked at Elias. Not something you received. She looked at Daniel. I thought I had to earn it. She looked at Eleanor. But you didn't give me anything. She looked back at the babies. And yet, here I am. She looked at them all and whispered, I didn't come here to fix anything. Daniel nodded. I know. I came here because I couldn't stay away. Eleanor smiled. That's the only thing that matters. Daniel stood, slowly, still holding Samuel, still holding Elias, still holding the truth. He walked to the window, opened it. The morning air rushed in fresh, clean, alive. He looked out, at the trees, at the sky, at the world that had once made him feel powerful, now felt small. In the best way, he turned back to them and said, I used to think I needed to be enough. He looked at Elias. I thought I had to be perfect. He looked at Marianne. I thought I had to be strong. He looked at Eleanor. I thought I had to be the man who fixed everything. He looked at the babies. And now, he paused. His voice broke. I just want to be the man who stays. Elias looked up. You are. Daniel nodded. I know, Marianne whispered. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. Daniel looked at her. You came. She nodded. But I was afraid. He stepped closer. I was too. She blinked. You? He smiled small. Every day. She didn't speak. She just reached out and took his hand. And then she reached for Eleanor's and Elias's. And Daniel placed Samuel's tiny hand on top and James's. And for the first time, all 7 hands were joined. For generations. One circle. No words. No titles. No apologies left to make. Just presence. Just love. Just belonging. And as the sun climbed higher, catching the tears on Marianne's cheeks, the quiet smile on Elias's lips, the peace in Samuel's sleep, and the strength in Daniel's eyes, he whispered, Thank you, not to God, not to fate, to them, to the ones who had waited, to the ones who had loved, to the ones who had never let go. And then he sat down, on the floor, with them, and he didn't move, not for the rest of the day, not for the rest of the week, not for the rest of his life, because he finally understood love doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it doesn't arrive with a suitcase, it arrives with a card, a bear, a song, a hand, a quiet, I'm still here, and then 7 fingers, for generations, 1 circle. No one moved, no one spoke, not because they were tired, but because to move would be to break the silence. And this silence, this quiet, trembling, sacred silence, was the first true language they'd ever spoken together. Marianne still held Samuel. Her arms, once stiff with grief, now cradled him like he was the last prayer she'd ever been allowed to say. Elias rested against her side, his head on her shoulder, eyes half closed, the teddy bear tucked beneath his chin like a shield and a gift. Daniel sat cross-legged beside them, still holding James, whose tiny fingers had found their way to Daniel's shirt, gripping the fabric like he'd been waiting his whole life to hold on. Eleanor leaned back against the bed, her legs drawn up, her eyes closed, not in sleep, but in reverence. She had watched them, all of them, for hours, and now she opened her eyes and whispered, Do you remember the day you left? Daniel didn't look up. He just brushed his thumb over James's forehead. I remember the suitcase. I remember the silence, Elias said, voice soft as a sigh. Marianne didn't speak. She just pressed her lips to Samuel's hair. I remember the phone call, Eleanor said. The one you made from the airport. You said, Tell her I'm sorry. You didn't say who. Daniel's breath caught. I didn't know who to say it to. You said it to me, Eleanor said. But you didn't say it to him. She looked at Elias. You never said it to him. Silence. Then Elias lifted his head. He looked at Daniel. Not with anger. Not with blame. Just quiet. Do you remember what I wrote on the card you found? Daniel blinked. The one with the bird? Elias nodded. I wrote, I'm still here. Daniel swallowed. I know. I wrote it every day, Elias said. For 8 years. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every time I woke up crying because I missed you. Daniel's throat tightened. I didn't know. I didn't want you to know, Elias whispered. Because if you knew, you'd feel guilty. Daniel looked at him. And if I felt guilty, you'd think I was coming back out of pity. Elias nodded. Yeah. Daniel closed his eyes. I didn't come back because I felt guilty. Elias waited. Daniel opened his eyes. I came back because I finally realized I didn't love you because you were mine. He paused. I loved you because you were you. Elias didn't move. His eyes filled. Daniel continued. I didn't come back because I needed a son. He looked at Marianne. I didn't come back because I needed a mother. He looked at Eleanor. I didn't come back because I needed a wife. He looked at the babies. I didn't come back because I needed heirs. He looked back at Elias. I came back because I couldn't live without you. Elias's breath hitched. You didn't have to say that. Daniel smiled, soft, broken, true. I didn't have to say anything. He looked down at James. But I needed to say it to you. Elias didn't cry. He just leaned his head back against Marianne's shoulder and whispered, I'm still here. Daniel nodded. I know. And then a sound. Not from the window. Not from the hallway. From inside. Samuel. He stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His lips parted. And then he made a sound. Not a cry. Not a whimper. A word. Soft. Muffled. Almost inaudible. But clear. Dada. Daniel froze. Marian froze. Elias froze. Eleanor sat up. All of them turned. All of them stared at Samuel, still asleep, still curled in Marianne's arms. And then he said it again. Dada. Not daddy. Not papa. That. The first word. The first sound. The first time he'd ever called anyone father. Daniel didn't move. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He just looked at Samuel and whispered, You called me. Samuel didn't answer. He just sighed and slept. But the word hung in the air, like a bell, like a promise, like a miracle. Marian looked at Daniel. You're his father. Daniel nodded. I am. Elias looked at him. And mine. Daniel didn't answer. He just reached out and took Elias's hand and held it. Then he looked at Marianne and whispered, And yours. Marianne's breath caught. She didn't speak. She just leaned down and kissed Samuel's forehead and whispered, Dada. Samuel didn't stir, but his lips twitched, like he'd heard, like he'd known. And then he smiled, just a little, a quiet, sleeping smile. Eleanor stood. Slowly, she walked to the window, opened it. The breeze rushed in, carrying the scent of rain-washed earth. And then she turned and walked to the door. She didn't leave. She just stood there and whispered, I'm going to make tea. No one answered. No one needed to. She closed the door, gently, and left them, alone, with the word, with the silence, with the love. Daniel looked at Elias. You heard it. Elias nodded. I heard it. You didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Daniel looked at Marianne. You heard it too. She nodded. I heard it. You didn't say anything. She looked at Samuel. I didn't want to break it. Daniel looked down at James, then at Samuel, then at Elias, then at Marianne. And then he whispered, Will you say it? Marianne blinked. Say what? Daniel looked at Samuel. Say Dada. Marianne didn't move. She didn't speak. She just looked at her grandson. And then she leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered, Dada. Samuel's lips twitched again. And then he sighed and slept. Marianne looked at Daniel. I didn't say it for him. Daniel frowned. Then why? She looked at Elias. I said it for him. Elias looked at her. For me. She nodded. I've waited 8 years to say that word. She looked at Daniel. And I waited 20 years to say it to you. Daniel's breath caught. To me. Marianne looked at him. I never called you Dada. Daniel stared. You never did. I was afraid. Afraid of what? She looked at the floor. That if I called you Dada, you'd think I was trying to replace your mother. Daniel didn't answer. He just reached out and took her hand and held it tightly and whispered, You never replaced her. Marianne's tears fell. I know. I know you loved her. I do. And I know you love me. She looked up and nodded. I